We're in the last chapter of the book of James, and I hope that this series has been encouraging for you. I hope you all have been growing in this. I know the Lord has been working in me as we've been going through this study here through the book of James. And if you don't have a Bible, the verses will be up on the screen. But we also have a live event on the YouVersion Bible app. And so if you go at the bottom, you'll see a More tab once you've downloaded the app. Get that More tab, you'll see events, click on that, and you'll see Awaken Church Live, and you can follow along there and take notes as well. I want to start off today by telling you a story I heard about an older couple named Morris and Esther. And Morris and Esther, every year, they would go to the state fair. And there would be all these different attractions, all these different rides. But there was one ride that Morris and Esther that Morris really wanted to do. But Esther was like, no, we can't do it. And this was a plane ride. Every year, Morris would see this plane ride. And he's like, I want to go on this plane ride. I want to go on this plane ride. And Esther would look at Morris and she would say, well, dear, it's $50. And $50 is $50. And year after year, they would have this conversation. They would have this argument. They would be going back and forth about wanting to take this plane ride until one day they're in their 90s and Morris is like, I can't take it anymore. Like, I want to take this plane ride. I want to go on this plane ride. I want to do this because if I don't do it now, then I might not ever get to do it in my life. And his wife Esther looked at him and said, well, Morris, it's $50. $50 is $50. Well, as they're arguing and complaining and bickering out one another, the pilot overhears all of this. And he kind of says, I don't mean to interrupt, but I just heard you guys talking about how you every year fight about this. Every year you talk about wanting to take this plane ride. And let me just make you a deal right now. Here's the deal. I'll take you up, and I'll take you up for free under one condition. You don't make a sound, and you don't say a word. As long as you don't make any peep or say anything, it's free. But if you do say something or you make a peep, then it's $50. Well, Morris and Esther just looked at themselves and they're like, well, this is too good of a deal. Like, we can't pass this thing up. Like, we've got to be able to take this plane ride. And so the pilot just goes bananas, like right from takeoff. He just shoots right up in the air and he starts doing barrel rolls. He's flying upside down. Like, he thinks he's Maverick from Top Gun, right? Like, he's just weaving in and out of the canes, going all over the place, going crazy. And he's surprised because nobody's making a sound. Nobody's making a peep. No one's saying anything. And so he lands the plane and he turns around to congratulate them. And then he looks at Morris and he goes, Morris, where's your wife? And Morris said, well, I thought about saying something a while back when she slipped loose, but $50 is $50. I wanted to start off a little lighthearted today because we're going to be talking about a topic that's a little heavy and something that we don't like talking about, and that is money. Now, did you notice all the fun just got sucked out of the room in that moment, right? I don't think it was just me. I think we all go, oh, great, here's what it is. And I know many of us, when we hear about the church talking about money, a lot of us will go, of course, that's what I'd expect. Let me put on my surprise face. Another church talking about money, that's all they ever want. But let me put you at ease here today. I'm not going to be bringing around an offering plate. I'm not going to even tell you how much you should give or anything like that. That's between you and the Lord. The Lord will bring that conviction. I'm going to do what we've always done as we've gone through this book of James. I'm just going to present God's word to you, and you need to talk to the Lord about all that stuff. But you might be sitting here and you might be thinking, okay. The church, shouldn't they be talking about spiritual things though? Because a lot of us, we feel some type of way when we talk about money in the church. And I kind of want to demystify that for us a little bit by seeing what the Bible has to say from a 30,000 feet view about money. See, when Jesus was on earth, he told these things called parables. And parables are just simple stories to illustrate kingdom truths. And he told 38 parables, and over half of those parables are on the topic of money. Now imagine today, you were to go home and you're to start text messaging your friend. You were to text message them about, maybe money or the latest movie you saw or something like that. And over half of the text messages were on that thing. Your friend would go, wow, like they really care about that subject. They want to say a lot about that topic. Again, the Bible gives us a big picture here. 500 verses are on prayer. And I think we all could agree. We would all say, well, my prayer life could be a little bit better. Like, I think we could all say, man, I could improve in this area of prayer in my life. There's 500 verses on our faith and our relationship to God. It's an important thing. But there's over 2,000 verses on this topic of money. So if you're wondering, why are we not talking about spiritual things? I would argue today that God seems to believe that what we do with our money and our resources and our wealth is a deeply spiritual thing. I would submit to you today that when the Bible talks about money, it's not about the amount of money, but our attitude towards the money that we have. And that's exactly what James is going after in our text today. So whether you're new here, you've been coming for a while, we're going verse by verse through this book of James. And James is writing to Jewish Christians who have been scattered. And what he's doing so far is he's writing to people who have put their faith in Jesus, that they are professing faith in Jesus, but they're not possessing faith in Jesus. He's got some concerns about that. That do they really possess this faith? And he's telling us, as true followers of Jesus, we don't just say we believe, but we have action to our faith. We have a faith that works. And over the last several months now, as we've been going through this book, but even more specifically, as we've been looking over the last several verses over this last month, James has been talking about these things that we would think are acceptable sins, things that we've justified, things that we've been like, well, that's okay that I do this or I do that. It's okay that I say these things with my words. You've justified in some way. It's okay that I make my plans apart from God. We've justified in some way. And so James kind of continues in that same vein of thought as he approaches this topic of money. And so the title of today's message is The Sin of Materialism. The Sin of Materialism. Pick up James chapter 5, verse 1. He says, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you." Anybody have that on your coffee mug? Anybody? It's on a pillow somewhere, etched in your walls? No? Nobody? All right, well, but let's see why he's telling us that we need to weep and howl. Verse 2, "Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. Behold, the wage of laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you." So James here in these verses, he kind of just throws down, doesn't he? There's some graphic language that he's using in these verses. And I was reading this week, he's almost like an Old Testament prophet. He's just kind of spitting fire. And he's like, hey, this should not be the way. This isn't the way that you should act. And this is not the way that you should live. James chapter 5 starts very similar to how James chapter 4 verse 13 starts, with this exclamation, with this like, hey, I'm pulling you in. Listen, come close to what I'm about to say. Pay attention. It's important. That word "come now" is the exact same. It's like an exclamation in the Greek. He's wanting us to listen to what he has to say. And he says, "Come now, you rich." Now, when I think we hear that, I think many of us go, internally, we just kind of breathe a sigh of relief. We're just kind of like, well, glad he's not talking about me, right? Like, I know some people who need to hear this message, so I can't wait to text this out, you know? Or we might be like, yeah, go get them, James. Like, go get those greedy people. But when we read a passage like this, we can easily just want to let ourselves off the hook because we think we aren't rich. The reality is we are rich. In fact, I want to give you a sobering picture of the fact that we are actually more rich than we might think. If you made $40,000 last year, from a global perspective, you are in the top 4% of wage earners on the planet. If you made $48,000, you are in the top 1% of wage earners from a global perspective on planet Earth. Now you might be like, I'm still not rich because I make that much. Well, guess what? You're still rich. You fall in there. You're still above. I think I heard like most of the world, like there's billions of people who live on $1 a day, like that kind of thing. Like you are rich. And if you make more than that, then you are wealthy. You are stinking rich, right? The fact of the matter is we are rich. So when James says, hey, rich people, he's speaking to us. He's talking to us. In fact, a few years ago, Money Magazine did a survey, and they asked a question: how much money in liquid assets do you need to have to feel like you're rich? You ready for the answer? $5 million. Here's what that means. The people making $2 million, they're just slumming it, right? Like they're just barely making ends meet. They're living paycheck to paycheck, you know? We are the rich. And here's the problem. We don't know we're rich, and so we don't act like we're rich. I'll say it this way. Nobody's rich, but everyone knows someone who is. We can all come in here today and we could be like, well, I know that person's rich and I know that person's rich. I saw what they drove today into church. They're definitely rich, right? But we are the rich people. Now, here's the thing. I know that a lot of us were struggling today. I know the economy is all crazy right now. Food costs are stupid high and gas prices are high. And I know that a lot of us, self-included, we're struggling to make ends meet and things like that. Listen, I'm not trying to downplay any of that kind of stuff. I'm not trying to minimize the struggle that you might have. But I'm hoping that you can see that what James is saying here and what our text is saying and what the statistics are showing is that we are rich. So this isn't something that we just brush off and go, well, this doesn't apply to me. This does apply to all of us. Again, James isn't saying that having money is bad, because the reality is there are righteous rich people and there are wicked rich people. There are righteous poor people and there are wicked poor people. There are righteous and wicked middle class people as well. And here what James is going after is our hearts. And he's challenging us to look at ourselves and see if we are more interested in riches than we are in righteousness. Is our focus more on Christ's likeness or more on our comfort? And James is speaking to all of us who would bow down to the king that's comfort and not the king that is Christ. And so James has 3 warnings for us today when it comes to the sin of materialism. And the first one that he gives us is that our volume speaks volumes. Our volume speaks volumes. Look again at what he says in verse 2. He says, your riches have rotted and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. James here is painting a very graphic picture that everything on planet Earth, everything that is material, everything that we hold on to, everything that we can touch, everything we can see, everything we can taste, everything that we put our trust in, the things that we strive for, the things that we are struggling to get, those things that we think will give us happiness, even though we know in the end they will not give us happiness. All these things that we are trying to accumulate here on planet Earth, at the end of the day, they will all corrode and they will rot. James is being serious here about us stockpiling and hoarding things. In fact, I did some research on this last week, and what I found out was that in the U.S., storage units are a $39 billion business. It's a big deal. I read that there's like 50 to 55,000 storage facilities across the United States. That's not units, that's facilities, places that you can store all of your stuff. I read that Americans have 2.3 billion square feet of self-storage. That's about 7 square feet for every single person in the U.S. And the reality is the vast majority of us who are storing our things also have garages, attics, basements where we're storing all that other stuff as well. But we're running out of room in our bigger houses, and so we need additional storage space to store all of our stuff off-site. Now, I'm not coming at you if you got a storage unit. Listen, I understand that there are seasons and transitions in life when we need those types of things. I understand we live in a military community, and so you're transitioning, and so you need a storage unit to put all your stuff. I understand that there are moments and seasons in our life where we need to store things off-site. Listen, I'm there too. I have things stored up in my attic. I got things in my garage too. I understand that there's a season of it, but what I'm saying is that we might be following comfort instead of following Christ when it comes to our money. In fact, Jesus said something similar, or maybe James is saying something similar to what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. In fact, I read that the book of James is kind of like a commentary to the Sermon on the Mount. So often when I'm saying, man, James might be thinking back of what Jesus is saying, I think that's exactly it. James is just kind of a commentary to everything. Over the last several months, we've been talking about the Sermon on the Mount. You go back to the Sermon on the Mount. James is very much a commentary to the Sermon on the Mount. But Jesus said what James is saying here earlier. Matthew chapter 6, verse 19. Jesus said, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Our volume speaks volumes. What Jesus is saying, what James is saying, is what are you holding on to? What has your death grip? What are you just grasping onto, clinging onto? What is it that you're putting your trust in? What are you giving all of your mental energy to? That is truly where your heart is. You could say you're a follower of Jesus. You could say that you worship God, but your idol is whatever you're gripping in your hand and giving all of your energy to. And James is reminding us that it's going to rot and that it won't last. There's a best-selling author, Christian author named Randy Alcorn. He has this to say. He says, when Jesus warns us not to store up treasures on earth, it's not just because wealth might be lost, it's because wealth will always be lost. Either it leaves us while we live, or we leave it when we die. No exceptions. See, all of our stuff at the end of the day, it will corrode and it will rot. And I think the reason why James is making such a big deal on hoarding and getting all these things is because it's the opposite of the gospel. In Philippians, we read that Jesus emptied himself out, that he did not consider equality with God something to grasp onto, something to hold on to, but that he emptied himself out. We all know one of the most famous verses of all time, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he hoarded? No, it's that he gave. We're made in the image and likeness of a generous God. And the gospel message is when I could do nothing to earn it, deserve it, merit God's favor or affection, he just gave it to me. And not only did he give it to me, he lavished it on me. So in Christ, to hoard and to stockpile is the opposite of the gospel message. Now, this isn't me saying, hey, don't ever save. You know, we need to have an emergency fund in case things go bad, save for retirement, save for those things, but we are called to be generous. Instead of running after things, we need to be running after God. But then look at what he says in verse 3. Your gold and silver have corroded. And I love that because there's some science-minded people in here today that you may have heard that and you might be going, well, wait a minute. Like gold is an incorruptible metal. You can't mess with gold. But I think that's the point that James is trying to make here. That the thing that you think is most sure in your life, the thing that you think cannot be messed up, cannot be corroded, if it's not in Jesus, it will corrode and it will rot. And then James says, and their corrosion will be evidence against you. And I think this is a sobering reality. Because everyone is going to face a judgment. We're going to face the judgment. What did you do with Jesus? And then what did you do with what I gave you? And every single one of us as believers, we're going to stand before a holy and righteous and sovereign God, and we will give an account for the things that God gave us and what we did with those things. And I thought about that this week, and I was like, man, how many of us, self-included, because it's not like I'm up here saying, oh, I'm up here living in poverty. No, listen, I'm right there with you. All of us, how many of us just pursue materialism? You know, I was thinking about all the things that I have. Like all this tech stuff that I've been saving up. Like I've got all these like electronics I'm hoping one day might make me some money, you know? Like I thought about my DVD collection that I got in college that I was like, man, I'm just going to have all these DVDs of my favorite movies and these are going to be great and I'm going to have, that's just sitting there in boxes. I thought about all these guitars. I play guitar. I have more guitars than what one person really should have. But I've got all these guitars. I have a closet with guitars just sitting in it right now. I have all these things. And I'm just going to leave this right there at your doorstep because fill in the blank with your own stuff. Because we could easily come in here today and we could point the finger at each one and go, well, I'm not as bad as that person. I'm not as bad as the pastor. I'm not as bad as this one. Listen, you have your own stuff. We're all stockpiling. We're all accumulating and holding on to things and chasing after things. And one day, they are going to testify against us. See, if you find ultimate identity, value, worth in your shoe collection, your portfolio, your investments, or whatever it is that you are into, if that's where your true identity and self-worth is, then that is sinful. Listen, it doesn't matter what you have. There are rich, righteous people in the Bible. Abraham, Job, Joseph, King David, Joseph of Arimathea. He's the guy who said, hey, Jesus can use my tomb, you know, after Jesus died. You have Philemon. It doesn't matter what you have. What matters is your attitude towards what you have. And James here is painting a very clear picture that your worth, your value, and your identity and trust in material things are going to leave you. And that one day they're going to testify against you. So don't put all your trust and hope into earthly treasures because they will rot. Here's the second thing. Second warning James gives us. And that is integrity with money matters. Verse 4, he says this, "Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts." Now, in the first century context, this was a farming society, and it was very common for them to hire what would be called day laborers. And day laborers were typically paid at the end of the day, and they were some of the poorest people. And so they used whatever they got to just buy their next meal. And so these were people who were really living paycheck to paycheck. And so here you have this wealthy landowner, and he hires these day laborers, but he's refusing to give the money to the people who earned it. And James is pointing out, hey, that's a problem. You're cheating them. See, in the first century, there were no contracts. There were no labor unions. Your boss could just simply look at the work that you did and go, nah, I don't like that. I don't like the work that you did, and just not pay you. See, the other thing about day laborers is they often had to travel where the work was. And so if a boss just held out long enough, eventually the person would have to leave and move on to the next place where the job was. Now, this verse doesn't just apply to employers. If you are an employer, hey, this does apply to you. You better make sure you're not cheating anybody. You better make sure that you're fair and all of that. But here's the bigger idea. That is that integrity with money matters. See, the question we need to ask ourselves today is whether we're dealing with a lot of money or a little money, is that in all of our financial dealings, are we handling the resources that God has given us with integrity? As Jesus followers, we should have integrity in every area of our lives. Integrity just means that you're the same person no matter where you go and no matter what you do. And I was reminded this week that this hasn't always maybe been the case for me. I haven't always had integrity in the things that God has given me and the resources and the money that I have. Now, again, it's not like I've gone and I've stolen money and done unethical things. It's not like that at all. In fact, even just a couple of weeks ago, Jen and I, we ordered this table thing, and we paid for one, but two came in. And I was like, sweet, let's put this one up, and then we could sell this one, or we could put it up over here. And Jen was like, no, the right thing to do is to call Amazon and, see if they want us to send it back. Typically, they don't. And I was like, Jeff doesn't care. It's fine. We don't need to. They're not missing it. Let's stick it to the man, And Jen was like, okay, Pastor, but what's the right thing to do? So I haven't always had integrity. Every Black Friday shopping we'll do with some friends, and it's mid-morning to late afternoon is when we go because we like to sleep in and all of that. But we went to this place called Bed Bath & Beyond, no longer in business, rip, right? It's just gone, and maybe this is part of the reason why they're gone now. But we went Black Friday shopping, and Jen went and she found this comforter for our bed. And she's like, I'm so excited, I got this great deal on this comforter. And so we're walking out, but we noticed that it was a queen size. We needed a king size. And so I'm like, well, I'll just keep the kids in the car. You go return it. We'll be just fine. So she goes into the store, gets the same thing. Again, 10 minutes have passed. She might have even had the same, person right there dealing with the transaction. And she gives the item and just says, I need to exchange this for this one. Exact same thing. And the lady gives her $100. She's like, well, here's $100. She's like, no. I'm not getting money back. I'm just exchanging this. If anything, I owe you just a little bit of money. She's like, no, here's $100. This is what it is. So Jen brings the manager over and starts saying, hey, this isn't right. And the manager's like, no, this is actually right. This is what it's supposed to be. And so she comes out and they gave her the $100. She walks out of the store with the $100. And so she's walking out to me and she's like, man, I just feel so bad. I'm like, well, what's going on? And she tells me the story and I'm like, why do you feel so bad? The first time they hand me $100, I'm like, praise the Lord, he provides. That's lunch, right? Kids, we're going to eat good today, right? I was like, what are you doing? Why would you do that? She's like, oh, I just feel so guilty still. I was like, who cares? This is a blessing. And she's like, well, Pastor, again, I don't know why why do you throw this out? Pastor, I'm just trying to do the right thing. And I was like, the right thing is just take the money, right? But I realized I haven't always had integrity in this. And I thought, man, this week, what about our areas, in all areas of our lives? We need to do whatever is necessary. We need to call the manager over. We need to do the right thing when it comes to this area of integrity. What area in your life do you lack integrity when it comes to money and finances? But then James gives some encouragement in the midst of all this rebuke in verse 4 at the end of it. He says, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. Here's the encouragement. I know there are some of us here today, and we might be on the negative end of somebody's lacking integrity. Whether it's a boss, and you're under their care, or someone who's trying to take advantage of you, or they're using you for their own gain, and you're crying out to God, I want to encourage you today that God hears you. And I want to say, don't stop crying out to God, because the one who's ultimately in charge, he hears you, and he will deal with them. But again, this is a warning. Because if we are the people exploiting or taking advantage, maybe of people, maybe of system, listen, maybe today you're going to go out to eat and you're going to take advantage and you're going to be a little cheap at the tip. Don't do that either, all right? God's going to deal with us when it comes to this. Here's the third and final warning. Money distorts our reality. Verse 5. You have lived on the earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you. See, ultimately what James is getting at here is that we are just consuming and consuming and consuming, and because of that, we have a distorted view of ourselves. And James is illustrating this by alluding to a process that cattle farmers would use to get steak ready to be on your plate. Again, what he's alluding to is when he says, you have fattened your hearts in the day of slaughter. See, if you were a cattle farmer, typically what you would do with a cow that you're getting ready to slaughter to become that steak, you just kind of keep feeding them and feeding them and feeding them. I think I read something like you feed them like 4 times their body weight. Like you're just fattening them up. You're getting them ready for all of that. And I thought, man, all the other cows must be looking at that cow going, man, he's eating good. He's living large. Like, oh, I'm so jealous of him. Like, look at that cow just eating right there. But the cow doesn't realize where it's all leading him to. And so what James is saying is that when we're fattening ourselves up, it's actually leading to our destruction. It's giving us a distorted view of ourselves. See, the warning here is when we don't fight the sin of materialism, when we're tempted to just be greedy and consume and consume and consume. I got another paycheck. I got another bonus. I got another thing over here, and I'm not generous with it before the Lord, saying, God, what would you have me do with this increase? What do you have me to do with what you've given to me? I'm just eating and eating and eating and eating. What happens is we become greedy in our own hearts. We fattened ourselves up, and we can become unconcerned and unfazed by what's really going on in our hearts and the selfishness that we have. See, James is accusing the rich of getting fat while the poor go hungry. And the truth is that what I found in 16 years of ministry is that the more money you make, the easier it is to be selfish. In fact, again, some statistics that I found on this is that if the median household income is $50,000, on average, you'll give about maybe 6% of it to churches or other charities. If you made $200,000 rather, on average, you'll give about 4% of it away. I read in Forbes magazine that Forbes' richest people, the top 400 people, only 156 of them gave. Out of that 156, they all gave less than 1%. See, money tends to do this to us. It makes us selfish. In fact, at one point in history, the richest man to ever walk the earth was John D. Rockefeller. He had all the money, had all the wealth, and there was a reporter asking him all these questions. And they were like, John, how much is enough? Like, kind of like, when is it? Like, you already have everything. You already have everything you could ever want and need. You're the richest person. How much is enough? And his response was, just a little bit more. And I wonder if that resonates with anybody here today. That you told yourself, when I make that dollar amount, well, I'll be content, I'll be happy. You might have felt content for about a second, maybe a week or a month, but the goalpost just keeps moving further and further and further. Listen, save. Be prepared. Save for retirement. Be smart with the resources that God has given you here on earth. But just as we're prepared for things here on earth, let's also prepare for the last days. See, all too often, I think we're too busy trying to keep up with the Joneses, but we're not actually considering if the Joneses are actually trying to follow Jesus. And so how do we plug this into our lives? How do we leave different today? I mean, again, every single weekend, I'll pray, God, would your word just bear weight on our lives? And so how do we apply this? I think it's just simply we need to be honest with ourselves and honest before God by making sure that money is in the right place in our lives. See, money is an amazing gift. Money is a great tool, but it makes a terrible God. And some of us, we have elevated money to the point where the Bible calls it an idol. And we are struggling and we're dealing with the sin of materialism. But today, the invitation for us is whatever it is that we're holding on to, that we're grasping onto, that has a death grip in our lives, that we would just loosen that up. We would loosen our grip. We would open up our hands and say, God, would you deal with this? See, none of us are immune to this sin. We can't just step back and go, well, glad that's not me. Like, I don't struggle with this. I'm good to go. That's like saying, I'll never lust. I'll never be greedy. Like, I'll never be angry. No, listen, we all have a bent. We all have a tendency toward this sin. And so the challenge for us today is to evaluate our hearts when it comes to the sin of materialism. We need to ask ourselves, what do my volumes speak? Am I just hoarding? Am I stockpiling? Or am I being generous with what the Lord has given me? Do I have integrity when it comes to the things that God has asked me to manage and to take care of? Am I fattening myself up? Do I have a distorted view of my reality and I'm just being selfish with what I have? Again, this week, it's not like I'm just like, all right, God, what do you give all the people? Listen, I'm part of God's people. I need to hear this stuff too. And so this week I was praying about this and how does this apply in my own life and how do I deal with this? Because again, I don't have it all figured out. I've tattled on myself. I've told you ways I've lacked integrity, things that I've dealt with in my own life with money. And I was reminded this week that there's this underlying issue of generosity even in my own life. Now, I give to the church. Jen and I look for opportunities to give when we can above and beyond, look to bless other people or look to help other organizations. Like, we are generous, but even in the generosity, I still struggle with the scarcity mindset. That no matter how much I have or don't have, I'm always like, well, what if this happens? Or what if that happens? And I hold really tightly to what I have. And God showed me this week is that that's an idol. Not the amount of money, my attitude towards the money. And maybe you're like me. You just kind of have this complex with money, whether you have a lot of it or you don't. And what the Lord showed me is that I may possess a lot of things, but I don't own anything. And we might be tempted here to say, well, you know what? The house is in my name. The car is in my name. Like, I got clothes in my closet that I bought with my money. I know that's what it says on paper, but we don't own anything. It's been given to us by God. God has given us things to take care of. And as I was sitting, I was praying and asking the Lord about all of this in my own life, it was just like he reminded me of how my kids are. I have 3 boys, and it's never a dull moment in our house, There's always something going on, and mostly it's with the younger 2. They're always fighting and arguing and with their toys, and so they got a whole arsenal of Nerf guns, and oftentimes I'll hear them say, well, that's my Nerf gun. Dad, would you tell him to give me my special toy back, my special gun back? Like, that's my thing. Can I have my toy back? And my first reaction is always like, yours? Like, I bought that. Technically, it's mine. I'm just letting you borrow it. Like, you're welcome for letting you borrow it, Like, that's my first reaction. Or I'll hear, well, that's my room. And I'm like, you're not paying. You're not contributing anything to this mortgage. Like, that's my room. I'm allowing you to use that and utilize that room. It's not your room. And you know what God showed me this week? He was like, Nate, you do the same thing. You don't own any of it. That isn't your house. I gave you that house. That isn't your car. I gave you that car. I'll even take it a step further. Oftentimes people will be like, man, your church is so great. This isn't my church. This isn't any of the pastor's church. We are just called to be stewards of the building, of the money, of the resources, of you as the people. That's what we're called to do. This isn't my church. This is God's church. And so God just was like, hey, you have a father, and I gave you things, so don't step in like you own it with authority. Now, I know today might have felt like a little bit of a rebuke, a condemnation. But I'm not condemning you. I'm condemning the flesh that we all have. All of us. We all worry about our comfort, our luxury, and our ease of life. Here's the encouragement I hope you hear today. If nothing else, this is the encouragement I want you to hear, is that there is a greater purpose for the resources that you have. Today, you would be reminded that the gospel, that Jesus gave himself for us, that he held nothing back, and he has given us everything that we have, and that all of us, we are called to steward the things that he gave us. And as we follow him, we would begin to look and act and be more like him in the things that he's given us. My hope and my prayer is that the gospel that has radically changed our lives, where he said, God, I've given you my life. I trust you with my life. That it would be seen in every aspect of our lives, all the way down to our wallets. Listen, there should be no other people on this planet who are more generous than believers. In Jesus, we have a hope beyond this place. We have a hope in the world to come, in the kingdom to come, the kingdom of heaven. And so my prayer for us today is that we would look more like our Creator.